and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
You may be seated. This honorable house now resumes its sitting. It is indeed a great honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to the sitting of the Honorable House of Representatives this Thursday, February 15, 2024. This is our first sitting in the new parliamentary session for 2023-2024. Strange. No, it will be 2024, 2025. Because, right, so we are still in old dates, but literally moving into the new budget year and parliamentary sitting. So our parliamentary sitting runs 2024, 1st of April is our budget, and that will take us to March of 2025. It is a pleasure and honor for those who are joining us here via PBCJ and other social medias. And there are persons who are in the gallery as well. Welcome to this sitting. I know we're starting a little smaller in numbers than normal. I realize many of our members are already out on the campaign trail. House Leader, not your turn yet. We'll do the call of the roll and then House Leader. And I know persons have indicated early, some will depart. Please ensure we have a quorum to the end. Clerk, call of the roll.
Mr. Clark, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Mallow Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terry Long, Ms. Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Dye, Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henry Kitts, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to join you in welcoming members to this first sitting of the new parliamentary year, and further to indicate that the tradition of starting on time and the discipline that has been attendant on that will remain, and that today's situation is an aberration, born of the tradition of having the ceremonial opening of the House and then to indulge in the gastronomic delights, compliments of our Prime Minister at Jamaica House. The traffic sometimes getting back interfere with our otherwise full commitment to time management. So this would be the only one, Madam Speaker, that we will not start at 2 p.m., precisely 2 p.m. Every Tuesday. Yes, but to your point, Prime Minister, when we are 1 minute late, you charge us at another place. So we want to maintain that. But I think it's an important fact to recall that this House has to set the tone, and discipline is a key part of it all. So, Madam Speaker, this year we will have a lot of strong business. The other papers you see with the carryover matters are going to occupy our time a bit. We are going to again have the sequential arrangements of the business of the House, the first sequence being the budgetary and financial matters, which will be led by our Minister of Finance at the opening of the budget on March 12th, and then it will be followed by the opposition spokesman and finance, leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister, and then the closing. And thereafter, we go into the sectoral debates, which hopefully will take us into somewhere end of May, June. And then we want to engage to the rest of the period as many of the private members' motion as we can during that period. And then we have our break. We come back in September, and we go straight into the state of the constituency debate, and again to have other opportunities for private members' motion. Question and answer to questions, we expect that that will go apace. We did very well in the last parliamentary year, and we expect no less in this one. Madam Speaker, today the primary matter for the House is, of course, the presentation of the motion on the estimate of expenditure for the year April 1, 2024 to March 31, 2025. The Minister of Finance will pilot this, and Madam Speaker, I therefore ask that the agenda would flow in the normal way as presented. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, House Leader. Statement by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House are the following: Annual report and audited financial statements of the Ports Management and Security Limited for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual report of the National Education Trust for the financial year 2022-2023. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Information Service for the financial year 2017-2018. Estimates of expenditure 2024-2025 for the financial year ending March 31, 2025, dated February 15, 2024. Jamaica Public Bodies Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2025, dated February 2024. Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2024-2025, dated February 15, 2024. Tax Expenditure Statement for the period 2020 to 2022, dated February 2024. Jamaica Mortgage Bank Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the financial year March 2025, dated February 2024, and the Government of Jamaica Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy for the financial year 2024-2025 to 2027-2028. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions. Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 9th day of February 2024, the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Political Ombudsman Interim Act and to Provide for Connected Matters was passed in the Senate without amendment. Thomas Tavares Finson, OJ, CD, KC, JP.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. Minister. May I have the podium for Minister Clark, please? May we have the podium for Minister Clark, please?
No, I'm not noted. Not yet. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the estimates of expenditure 2024-2025 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, the Jamaica Public Body Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2025, the Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2024-2025, the Tax Expenditure Statement for the year, for the period, for the 2024 period, the Jamaica Mortgage Bank Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2025, and the Government of Jamaica Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy for the financial year 2024-25, 2020 to 2027-28, and the Public Sector Consolidated Estimates of Expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, and the Revenue Estimate 2024-2025 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, which were laid on the table of the House on the 15th day of February 2024, be referred to the Public Administrations and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the House, motion for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House, first obtained, public business.
Madam Speaker, the single item on public business will, of course, be taken by the Minister of Finance in relation to the estimates of expenditure with regards to the appropriations bill. Madam Speaker, just to indicate that the Minister, after making his opening remarks, might wish to make a further remark for which I may ask for a suspension of the standing orders to allow him to do it on the statement by ministers. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, House Leader.
I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister of Finance and Public Service to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the estimates of expenditure, well, Madam Speaker, in the table of the supplementary estimates, Madam Speaker, it's customary to just give some opening remarks that allow for some narration of the documents. On the point of timeliness, Madam Speaker, all the documents are here at 2 o'clock today. It takes a long time to get these printed, and printing would have started from the weekend in order to have all of these documents available here in Parliament and distributed by 2 o'clock on Thursday. And I really have to thank all of those involved in that process, a very tedious process, and to thank the Government Printing Office for delivering. So, Madam Speaker, another year has gone as we collectively work towards the vision of continually improving standards of living for all citizens of Jamaica through execution of annual budgets approved by the Houses of Parliament. Today, Madam Speaker, I table the annual budget documents outlining the government's plan to further the fulfillment of this objective during this fiscal year of 2024-2025 and across the medium term. All Jamaicans, Madam Speaker, should be proud of the fact that alongside the holding of elections that some have described as having more than a local feel, the national budget is being tabled on time and within schedule. This was not always the case, Madam Speaker, just by virtue of, in the general elections of 1989 were held on February 9th, and this delayed the budget until June of that year, even though the financial year began on April 1st. More recently, just to be balanced, more recently, the general elections of 2016 were held on February 25th, Madam Speaker, and there's no budget tabled before February 25th. No budget was tabled before February 25th, and although the financial year starts on April 1st, Madam Speaker, the budget was delayed until May of that year. And before anybody points out, Madam Speaker, the obvious that these were general elections, and this is a local government election, I'll also give the example of, in 1981, local government elections, or parish council elections as they were then called, were held on February 4th of 1981, which resulted in the budget debate not starting until May of that year. Madam Speaker, election or no election, the national budget must be passed. It must be tabled such that it can be passed in the House of Representatives by March 31st of this year. Madam Speaker, this brings order, increases certainty, and allows citizens to plan. To facilitate that, the budget is being tabled today, on time, on schedule, despite the pending elections, as the people's business must go on. Madam Speaker, Jamaica's national budget is now firmly in the $1 trillion range, with total expenditure and payments for fiscal year 2024-25 estimated at $1.3 trillion. This is to be financed by revenue and grant receipts of $1 trillion and loan and other financing of $0.3 trillion. 0.3. It should be noted that the government has debt maturing of $317 billion this year, which is included in the expenditure figure above, as compared with the $125 billion that matured last year. When you look at non-debt expenditure, however, at approximately $849.9 billion, this is 10.9% higher than the non-debt expenditure of $765.8 billion in the fourth supplementary estimates of 2023-24. The revenue expenditure profile program, Madam Speaker, generates the targeted positive fiscal balance of 0.3% of GDP as required under the recovery profile generated following the suspension of fiscal rules in fiscal year 2020-21. Contributing to the $1.3 trillion expenditure profile are non-debt recurrent expenditure of $769.9 billion, capital expenditure of $80 billion, and debt service of $491.2 billion. Non-debt recurrent expenditure includes allocation for recurrent program expenses at $327.8 billion, as well as compensation expenses at $442 billion. The compensation allocation includes an estimated amount to conclude the implementation phase of the restructured compensation system during the fiscal year. Madam Speaker, wages and salaries are projected to represent 12.6% of GDP in 24-25. Madam Speaker, and this is up from 9.2% of GDP in 2019/20. And it must be noted that the amount budgeted for public sector compensation for 2024-25 exceeds actual compensation for 2021-22, the year before the compensation restructuring began, by approximately $200 billion. It is obvious, Madam Speaker, that the government has made a concerted effort to address historical challenges with public sector compensation, and now it is time to consolidate. As a country, we need to be careful to ensure that sufficient resources are left for growth-inducing capital expenditure, for programs that can enhance Jamaica's human capital, and for social expenditure on behalf of more vulnerable members of the Jamaican society. The capital expenditure of $80 billion includes an allocation to commence implementation of the SPARK program during fiscal year 24-25, and an allocation to continue the ongoing CAPEX programs that are outlined in the Public Sector Investment Program. Improving human capital is a major theme in the allocation of CAPEX this year, Madam Speaker. The capital expenditure budget includes allocations for the most comprehensive health infrastructure improvement since our independence. Madam Speaker, approximately $11 to $12 billion is being allocated for the modernization of the Spanish Town Hospital, the continued construction of the new Western Children's and Adolescent Hospital, the rehabilitation of Cornwall Regional Hospital, as well as the upgrades to the Maypen and St. Anne's Bay hospitals and the Greater Portmore and St. Jago Park health centers, among other CAPEX expenditures in the Ministry of Health. Debt service includes $173.8 billion for interest payments and $317 billion for the repayment of debts that are maturing. The repayment of debts that are maturing, otherwise known as amortization payments, represent an increase of 128.9% over fiscal year 23-24, primarily due to the large maturities on both domestic and external portfolios, and those would have been programmed at the time those debts were entered into several years ago, and in some cases more than a decade ago. This House will recall that a large chunk of the maturing debt was pre-financed at low interest rates through Jamaica's entry into the resilience and sustainability financing with the IMF. Planning in advance. Loan financing, Madam Speaker, is therefore programmed at $191 billion, and combined with the significant amortization amount, will contribute to a net reduction in the debt as we continue to work towards achievement of the legislative debt to GDP target of 60% or less. the House is asked to note that the revenue estimates tabled today reflect the 2023-24 original budget position, although we have indicated revisions to the estimated revenue alongside tabling of the supplementary estimates during the year, due to the revised estimates not being prepared at the detail level required for the annual budget. So the revenue estimates that are tabled today are the original revenue estimates in March of last year. They would have been revised upwards in subsequent supplementaries. The self-financing public bodies are programmed to achieve an overall balance surplus of $34.4 billion in the upcoming fiscal year, and this is generated from the operations of 53 public bodies. The self-financing program public bodies are programmed to undertake $96.4 billion in capital expenditure during the year, mainly through the National Housing Trust at $50.7 billion, the National Water Commission at $10.8 billion, the Port Authority at $7.9 billion, Airports Authority at $4.7 billion, Petrojam at $3.6 billion, and the Housing Agency of Jamaica at $3.2 billion. Madam Speaker, the House is asked to note that between the central government and the the self-financing public bodies, capital expenditure for fiscal year 2024-25 is programmed at $176.4 billion, or 5.4% of GDP. This represents a 1.6 percentage point increase in capital expenditure as a percentage of GDP over the estimated 23-24 outturn, and demonstrates the government's effort towards improving the economic growth of the country and facilitating the associative positive secondary effects of development advances on the countries. Madam Speaker, debt to GDP is on track for 72.2% by March 31st, 2023, lower than the 74% previously targeted, and is projected to be, Madam Speaker, 67.2% by March 31st of 2025. Madam Speaker, if achieved, this will be the lowest debt ratio in well over 40 years. This year, the debt ratio is in the region of the pre-FinSAC levels, Madam Speaker, and if we are to achieve the program execution this year, as outlined, it will be the lowest in over 40 years, and I will get the precise year when debt was that low in the past. In concluding, Madam Speaker, details on allocations under the fiscal year 24-25 budget will be provided during my budget presentation on March 12th of 2024.
The member from St. Andrews Southeastern responding.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We don't intend to start the budget debate here today, but I do have a couple of remarks in response to the Minister's statement. The public sector wage bill, which is understandably high based on the compensation exercise, which started last year, has reached 12.6% of GDP. While we have removed the 9% target that existed, I would like to know what is the projection going forward, given the challenges that we have had with growth and the fact that our growth rates tend to be in the 1 to 2%. And while the adjustment was necessary, we are seeing a higher than normal wage to GDP ratio. The second concern I have, while an increase in the capital budget is always welcome, we are having difficulties spending what we allocate. And what I'd like to know what the government plans to do to deal with and all of them, some are procurement issues, some relate to the non-responsiveness of the private sector to bids that are put out, but at the end of the day, we're not spending the monies that have been allocated. And that has a detrimental impact on many other things down the road. So it is important to understand how we plan to address those deficiencies so we can actually spend the increase in the capital expenditure. And on that note, and I am being a little parochial here, the SPARK program was announced by the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago. The Prime Minister indicated that consultations had to be held by March 31st. I raised concerns, but that's the deadline. But I am concerned on February 15th, today is the 15th, that there's been no communication to us as members of Parliament about the process, the consultative process, what we need to do, particularly given that we have an event on the 26th, and then we move into the budgetary exercise immediately after. So I can't go out and have a consultation in my constituency without guidelines, and particularly within the context that I know NWA was asked to do some work in each constituency to inform members of Parliament as to roads, estimates, etc. So that is a specific concern I have, and we are not coming back here until the budget debate starts. So the Prime Minister isn't here, but I hope that particular concern can be addressed. But Minister, when we start the debate, we'll go into the specifics, but those are my remarks.
Thank you, Member. Minister?
Yeah, so Madam Speaker, I appreciate the comments of the member from St. Andrew South Eastern, Madam Speaker. In the budget timetable, it requires us to table the budget and have the debate a couple of weeks earlier, but putting all these documents in the public domain without some kind of narration can lead to, misunderstanding. And so the purpose here is just to provide a skeletal outline and not to engage in a debate. There's a full schedule that is for that. And so I thank him for that accommodation. So on we don't want to go much beyond this number in terms of wage to GDP. 12.6 is already on the upper end of wage expenditure for comparable peer group countries. And so it's going to be the answer to your question is that going forward, wage growth cannot exceed revenue growth. It cannot, it has to be less than how your revenues are able to grow, right? So it's something that will require the entire society to weigh in on, and for us to not have one-dimensional conversations around wages, given the historic effort that has been made to address long-standing and legitimate grouses and grievances. It's critically important that resources are available for the wider society. The public sector is only 100,000 individuals. There are 3 million people who live in Jamaica, and the budget has to serve all 3 million. And it's important that I think that we hear that more voices are in that conversation, and that the conversation is no longer one-dimensional, but takes into account the realities that Jamaica faces and other priorities for government spending. The member makes a very good point about the absorptive capacity of the public sector to absorb capex expenditure. Here we have 80 billion. Last year this year we're just managing to scrape to 60 billion. So it's a very legitimate question, but we continue to push, member, because without capital expenditure, the country needs capex in order to improve. What we're going to be doing is revising some of the thresholds in the Procurement Act. Thresholds were set several years ago, and by revising those thresholds upward, we'll provide more autonomy in the system. And we're also looking at revising we have already made some revisions in the public investment process to provide for emergencies, and we are going to make a revision that puts a de minimis threshold through which the public investment process will be undertaken in a ministry, as opposed to being the national public investment process, which is a little more detailed and cumbersome. And we hope that that will speed things along. But the comment is is taken. With respect to the Spark program, it's really a comment for the Prime Minister, or for the Minister of Economic Growth and Job Creation. What I say, though, member, is that the Prime Minister will speak about this more fulsomely in the debate. And as members of Parliament, we have to do our part too. The only reason why I think the reason for the policy is because it's a large amount of expenditure going into this category relative to the past. It's important that there is some democratic legitimacy at the constituency level to how it's allocated. Right, but you need more details. I understand that. So, Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the estimates of expenditure for 2024-2025 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, the Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue expenditure for the year ending March 2025, the Government of Jamaica fiscal policy paper for the financial year 2024-2025, the tax expenditure statement for the period 2020 to 2022, the Jamaica Mortgage Bank estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2025, and the Government of Jamaica medium-term debt management strategy for the financial year 2024-25 to 2027-2028, the revenue estimates for 2024-2025 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, and the Jamaica 2024-2025 public sector consolidated estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, which were laid on the table of the House on the 15th day of February 2024, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives for consideration and report. And
members, you have heard the motion put by the Minister. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, Standing Finance Committee will meet March 5th to March 7th, and I believe the meetings commence at 10 a.m. Well,
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, there's a small sidebar which would allow for small housekeeping matter to be sorted out.
Minister?
Yes.
Minister?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
I'm not sure how long your conversation will be. Would it be one you could have after?
Madam Speaker, I would urge, well, I know, but we could do that behind it. That's the usual place to do it behind. I know, but no, Madam Speaker, you are quite correct, and I think members have to appreciate that any interchange in the House other than what is sanctioned by you is ultra vires or arrangement, and therefore should be conducted behind the Speaker's desk. So, Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the recommittal of item announcements in order to allow the clerk to properly table the 2024-25 public sector consolidated estimate of expenditure for the financial year ending the 31st of March and the revenue estimates 24-25 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025. I would also, Madam Speaker, in the same breath, ask for the recommittal of statements by ministers to allow the Minister of Finance to make a statement. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Those in favor of recommittal of announcements, then statement by ministers. As question, those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. So we'll have announcements, then statement by ministers. Clerk? Minister, please take your seat for a moment.
Also, the House today are the following: Jamaica revenue estimates 2024, 2025 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2025, and dated is 15th day of February 2024. And Jamaica 2024-2025 public sector consolidated estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending the 31st of March 2025, dated the 15th day of February 2024.
Thanks, Clerk. Minister of Finance and Public Service. Member from St. Andrew Northwestern. Please turn on your mic, Minister.
So, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I wanted to thank my colleagues in the House for accommodating the aberration that I don't have it in something printed. Madam Speaker, the emoluments for members of the judiciary are determined in accordance with the Judiciary Amendment Act of 1992, which requires that these be independently reviewed in 3-year cycles. Madam Speaker, by provisions of the Judiciary Amendment Act of 1992, Section 4A1, the 10th Independent Commission of the Judiciary was established by the Minister of Justice on April 1st of 2022 for a period of 6 months. By way of a letter dated September 25th, 2022, an extension was given for a further 6 months to allow the Commission to complete and present its report. The named members of the 2022 Commission, pursuant to the instrument of appointment, were Mr. Leighton McKnight, Chairman, Ms. Minna Israel, Commissioner, and Mrs. Michelle Robinson, Commissioner. And the Commission was appointed to inquire into the adequacy of the salaries and other amounts payable under the Act and the adequacy of the judges' benefits generally, and to make recommendations as the Commission considers appropriate in relation to the above. On the 9th of May 2023, I presented the Judiciary Salaries Order 2023, which incorporated recommendations of the 10th Independent Commission for the Judiciary, and I also provided reasons for any deviations from those recommendations. However, Madam Speaker, in that presentation, I did not address 4 aspects of recommendations, which I propose to do briefly now. The first of these recommendations from the Independent Commission was that health benefit, and the reason, Madam Speaker, is to preserve judicial independence. It is necessary for the public to be aware of the reasons for either the government of the day can't be compelled to accept recommendations of a commission in a democratic society, because it all depends on what the recommendations say. However, if they're not to be accepted, the public ought to be informed as to why, so that there isn't room for any speculation of reward or punishment, as the case may be. And so while this may not have been the practice in the past, we're trying to move our arrangements to higher and higher heights, so to speak, as far as transparency is concerned. So recommendation that was not accepted, that was made, was increase health benefits to $2 million, Jamaican dollars. This recommendation was not clear. For example, the overseas emergency benefit under the existing plan is $100,000 US. So saying increase health benefits to $2 million is not clear as to what a recommendation means. For the benefit of the public, however, and of the Commission, I'll provide a background on the health insurance schemes for office holders paid from resources of the Consolidated Fund. Currently, the government of Jamaica operates 2 health insurance administrative-only plans for its employees and 1 plan for government pensioners. The Government Employee Administrative Services Only Plan, GESO, which covers approximately 180,000 employees and their dependents, and includes members of Parliament. Being an administrative services only arrangement, it is the government that assumes all risk with the plan. And any shortfall in the fund to satisfy the settlement of prescription drugs and medical services, along with management fees, the consolidated fund would be required to make the shortfall. So it's administered by persons that are selected from among the group of public sector employees, has been around for a couple of decades, and has an enviable track record of always being in positive territory. Premiums are paid on the basis of employer 80% and employee 20%. Prescription drugs and services having the same ratio. And then there's another one, a senior government executive health scheme that provides coverage for members of the executive, permanent secretaries, high court judges, state ministers, heads of departments, and the leader of the opposition. The spouses and children under the age of 19 are dependents. Premiums are paid on the basis of the employer 70% and employee 30%, and an employer 80%, employee 20% distribution of costs for drugs and medical services. The plan is an administrative services only plan, and what that means is that there's no company with which you're insured. Because it's such a large group, you have 200,000 people, the company only provides administrative services. Premiums go into a fund from which benefits are paid out. Now, if the recommendation were to increase benefits there, just to make out, increasing the benefits under this policy would have the effect of increasing the premium, and depending on the extent of such increases, the government would probably have to look at changing the ratio of premium covered by employer versus employee. There's also the government pensioners administrative only plan that covers about just over 35,000 public sector retirees, which does not include the justices. They are in the other plan. The current enrollment is 29, well, I said that earlier, approximately, I said 35, I'm corrected, 29,000. The premium is 80/20, and benefits now, the managers of these schemes, Madam Speaker, which are the Ministry of Finance, trade unions, and the Government Pensioners Association, along with the administrator, which is tendered every couple of years, now the administrator is Sagicor, make every effort to ensure that the funds are managed in a way that allows for settlements in a timely way. The government and members of each of these schemes benefit from huge economies of scale and lower costs through the consolidation of over 200,000 members and dependents across 3 administrative-only health plans. The second recommendation, Madam Speaker, was to increase the tier of the Chief Justice and President of Court of Appeal to Category B as far as motor vehicles are concerned. The response is that the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service is in the process of preparing a draft motor vehicle policy for the judiciary. However, given the sources of fund and in the interest of equity across the government, all arms of the government, this policy will be aligned to the wider motor vehicle policy, which is currently being revised. It is anticipated that the draft policy for the judiciary will be provided for review in the near future. The third, Madam Speaker, is to index the pension of retired judges to the salary of current judges. Now, Madam Speaker, this is just from a principled perspective, policy perspective. The government is not in support of any policy that would index the pension of any officer paid by the Consolidated Fund to existing salaries. At its extreme, to do so simply means that the government of Jamaica would be paying, essentially, equivalent to paying compensation for 2 sets of people, or not even 2, maybe for several sets of persons at the same time. it is fiscally unaffordable. There is an argument that has been put forward that members of the judiciary, upon their retirement, and the retirement age is 75 years old, are unable to work in their profession. But my understanding, Madam Speaker, is that that broad description is not wholly and completely accurate. My understanding is that members of the judiciary are unable to act in a matter that requires them to approach the bench and to appear before the judiciary of which they were once a member. However, working in the field of law that does not involve approaching the bench is open to persons who are retired justices. And indeed, there are several provisions in Jamaican law that require judges to be present, and we make use of retired judges for those. So the Appeals Commission for the Financial Services Commission makes use of retired judges. The Appeal Tribunal under the Banking Act makes use of retired judges. The Appeals Tribunal under, I believe, the Electricity or one of the Energy Acts makes use of retired judges. And there are other commissions, Madam Speaker. The Integrity Commission speaks to having retired judges, a retired judge as a member of the commission. And these are commissions that provide remuneration. Not necessarily arguing that remuneration for all of these commissions are fit for purpose, but there are members of the judiciary are able to work or able to use their skills in retirement. The only caveat is that they can't appear before the judiciary of which they were once a member. And in addition, members of our judiciary are able to serve on the judicial bodies of other countries certainly within this region, as they often do. So, Madam Speaker, the recommendation to index pensions to existing salaries of members of the judiciary does not find favor with the government. I'll give you two other reasons, Madam Speaker. The members of the judiciary are among the highest paid persons who are paid out of the proceeds of the consolidated fund. You know, the highest paid pensioners in Jamaica include, I should say, members of the judiciary. And if we were to do this for them, it would create or could create inequities in our society. And in the revision of public pension undertaken in 2017, where over 30 public pension acts were consolidated into a single act, Madam Speaker, it was an oversight that needs to be corrected with respect to contribution, that members of the judiciary were left out. So members of the judiciary today comprise the only group of persons paid from the consolidated fund and who receive pensions from the consolidated fund who do not contribute to their pensions. The only group. And as I say, that was an oversight, it was an aberration, that was not the policy intent when the amendment law was passed in 2017. So in light of that, it makes it even more, it grounds or stands even more that this recommendation cannot be accepted, Madam Speaker.
Minister, your time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, The member's time having been expired, I beg to move that it be extended by 5 minutes to allow him to complete his presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Question is that the member's time be extended by 5 minutes to facilitate completion. Statement by Minister. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, House Leader. Thank you, members. So the final recommendation that I wish to address, that, Madam Speaker, was a recommendation that judges be assigned fully maintained motor vehicles. And by judges, I mean members of the judiciary. Now, Madam Speaker, under the recently implemented compensation restructure of the public service, the government's policy has been to align compensation in the public service with the current state of the country, taking into account the efforts to become a fully operational market economy. And this requires, for the most part, that someone paid by the consolidated fund is compensated for the job undertaken, and from that compensation addresses his or her needs. While, Madam Speaker, there is a provision for persons who are running particular units across the government, and there's a policy, so the President of the Court of Appeal and the Chief Justice, for all members of the judiciary, Madam Speaker, consistent with other arms of government, the requirement is that you use the compensation that you have in order to purchase the vehicle of your choice. And members of the judiciary also benefit from the government's 20% concessional motor vehicle policy. The salaries of members of the judiciary were raised substantially in the last year, in May of 2023. And it's the view of the government that, consistent with the policy, that all persons who are paid by the consolidated fund abide by, as I said, apart from those who are, there's a provision for people who head agencies or head divisions, that motor vehicles are provided for them. But we have done away with the policy, Madam Speaker, of motor vehicles being provided as a form of compensation. And for that reason, Madam Speaker, the inconsistency of this recommendation with the broader goal of the government's policy, this recommendation, and with the large increases that were granted to members of the judiciary, this recommendation was not accepted. Madam Speaker, that concludes my statement, and I thank you for the accommodation. I thank members of the House, in particular members of the opposition, given that it's not a written statement. And this statement, Madam Speaker, is only being made in the fulfillment of transparency, in raising the bar for how these independent commissions, which are appointed, how we make decisions as to their recommendations, and we provide full ventilation as to the recommendations that are accepted, the reasons for accepting those recommendations, the recommendations that are not accepted, and the reasons for not accepting them. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I take note of the reasons outlined by the Minister of Finance, and we understand the issues of equity in the public sector compensation process. I would reserve our position. It's something I would certainly want to discuss with the opposition leader who isn't here. I've heard your arguments, particularly about the pegging to current levels, and I've noted what you have said. So we take note of it. We understand, in the interest of transparency, it's important for the public to understand why those decisions have been made. But I'd reserve our full position until I've had an opportunity for discourse with the members on this side.
Thank you, House Leader.
It is not intended to do any further business today. I therefore beg to move that this Honorable House be adjourned for a date to be fixed. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, House Leader. The question is that this Honorable House to now adjourn for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned. House Leader, that is not in order either. I would like to leave the House and then you can have that discourse.
The Jamaica Debates Commission presents Local Government Debates 2024, 9 p.m. Thursday, February 15. Teams from the JLP and the PNP will be questioned by an expert panel of journalists and you about local government policy and how it affects you. Thanks to JN Group, we'll help you find a way. Petrojam, serving Jamaica's energy needs. National Democratic Institute, the Lasco Foundation, Pan Jamaica Group, Miss Birdie. The Local Government Debates 2024, presented by the Jamaica Debates Commission, Thursday, February 15 at 9 p.m. Watch, listen, decide, vote.
That is my life. For reggae is the heartbeat of a people.
The National Family Planning Board now presents a parenting tip from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Men are what their mothers made them.
Reggae's Mellow Canary, Barrington Levy, was about 14 when he formed a group with his cousin Everton Dacres called Mighty Multitude. The duo released My Black Girl in 1977. Just 1 year later, Levy, a regular performer at dances, established his solo career with the song A Long Time Since We Don't Have No Love. Producer Henry Jonjo Laws discovered Levy singing on a local sound system. Levy recorded a number of singles at the Channel 1 studio. Quite a number of the songs became hits, including Collyweed, Looking My Love, and Shine Eye Girl, featuring Ja Thomas. Before 1980, most of Levy's popular singles were featured on the albums Shaolin Temple, Bounty Hunter, Shine Eye Gal, and Englishman. Englishman was one of Levy's most popular albums outside of Jamaica, especially in the UK. The album established Levy as one of the biggest reggae singers of the 80s. Levy's international fame continued to grow with the release of his next album, Robin Hood. However, ironically enough, after the release of the album, Levy took a break from releasing albums because his work was being pirated.
I said I have a problem. I have a problem.
Between 1981 and 1983, Levy maintained his popularity with singles such as Black Rose,
Black roses in my garden,
Money Move, and My Woman.
she is a problem.
The track that was the biggest success for Levy was Under Me Sensi. The tune was popular in the United States and the UK and was a national chart topper.
Under me sense, me under me sense. Under me sense, me under me sense.
Following the success of Under Me Sensi, Levy finally returned to releasing albums. In 1983, he released Lifestyle and Money Move. Around 1984, he released the album Here I Come, whose title track climbed to the top 50 position of the UK charts. The album created a buzz in Britain that resulted in Levy winning Best Vocalist at Britain's Reggae Awards.
I'm broader than Broadway.
Also in 1984, Levy collaborated with another young singer, Frankie Paul. Together, they released the captivating Sound Clash album, Barrington Levy Meets Frankie Paul. A year later, Levy released the album Prison Oval Rock.
Every day I love her just a little bit more, little bit more, little bit more. Every day I love her just a little bit more, and she loves me the same.
By the late 1980s, Levy, now in his 20s, slowed down his output, though he continued to be a top attraction at stage shows. In 1988, he released Love the Life You Live, in which he found local success with the single She's Mine, produced by Jack Scorpio, and a cover of Bob Andy's Studio One hit, Too Experienced.
But I keep telling her I'm too experienced to be taking for a stroll.
As the new decade dawned, Levy inked a deal with the Island Records-owned Mango label and released the Divine album. But after a stunning performance at the 1993 Reggae Sunsplash, Barrington was signed to MCA Records and the album Barrington was released. The album didn't sell, and eventually Levy and MCA Records parted ways.
Don't throw it all away. I don't want to be the one who's gonna activate you to say. I don't want to be the one to change your mind. One more time, please stay. Don't throw it all away.
It wasn't until the mid-90s that Levy regained the stardom he had earlier in his career with the song Living Dangerously, featuring Bounty Killer. It was undisputedly the biggest reggae song of 1996, both in Jamaica and the United States, and for months held the #1 spot on the dancehall charts worldwide. The track was one of the most popular songs featured on the album Living Dangerously, which was released in 1998. Even in the new millennium, Levy continued to prove his staying power in the industry. He collaborated with rapper Shine on 2 singles, Bonnie and Shine and Bad Boys.
Man, a bad boy in the corner, so move from on ya, 'cause we are dangerous.
Although not as much as in previous years, Levy continues to record and tour the world, waving the flag of reggae high.
Whoa, 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 yeah, I'm Mr. Reggae Ambassador. Whoa, 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 yeah, I'm Mr. Reggae Ambassador.
This is the Aedes aegypti mosquito that spreads the Zika, chikungunya, and dengue viruses. Protect yourself from the bite of this mosquito.
A message from the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
Hospital visits are anticipated to increase up to the end of this year and into the first few months of next year as we see more cases of dengue, flu, and other illnesses. As a result, emergency departments may be overcrowded with longer waiting times. We have therefore extended opening hours at select health centers island-wide. Persons with mild illnesses and chronic diseases, including diabetes and hypertension, should visit with their health center. Let us work together to protect others against dengue and other illnesses.
G-Force! 5 teenage champions. G-Force, guardians of space, fighting for good over evil, fighting to defend planet Earth from deadly enemies from space. Ace Goodhart, leader of the team, strong, vigilant, fearless as a hawk, guarding the 4 young agents under his command. Dirk Daring, second in command, a crack marksman with the eye of an eagle and nerves of steel. Agatha June flies like a dove, strikes like a falcon, a match for the strongest on the team. Hoodow, Hootie to his friends, wisecracking navigator who flies the amazing rocket ship Phoenix and laughs at danger. Pee-wee, small and bold as a merlin, the tiniest hawk of them all. These are the adventures of G-Force, 5 secret agents trained to fly like birds. G-Force, guardians of space.
It was one of the proudest days of my life when Dr. Brighthead asked me, Ace Goodhart, to test pilot the first flight of the Super 10 jet aircraft. Dr. Brighthead had worked long and hard to develop a plane that could travel at supersonic speeds and produce no air pollution.